Right, hi Jodie, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, thank you.
Good, good. This is our third recording, I think,
It is.
and it would be great, I think, based on the conversations we've had to date, just to go back to something we mentioned in the last recording that we did, which was the concept and the idea of AI. I think we said last time it's absolutely everywhere. You can't get away from it. And obviously, you've utilized and embraced AI into the Engage approach. But it kind of threw up a question that we've talked about, which is so many clients are investing in encouraging people to utilize AI in their daily practices, to be trained on it so they understand it a little bit more than just using it as a search engine, which many, many people do. But I think it throws up a really interesting conundrum for people, which is although we may know something could be useful for us and has potential for making the future better, and I think AI probably definitely falls into that, there are lots of people who are fearful of it. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about the fear that people often have towards change. And then we're talking change sort of generically here. This is changing technology in the workplace and having to embrace something which perhaps intellectually we might think, well, that's a good idea. That's great. But emotionally thinking, I don't understand this or I can't do this. And how perhaps training people in something that they have an underlying fear or anxiety about using often yields nothing. I just wonder what your views were, given how you've embraced EI with Engage, on that kind of fear that many people seem to have about the use of AI in their day-to-day roles and day-to-day jobs.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I think this is probably one of the hottest topics we've got at the moment. I'm
Hmm.
working with lots of leaders, consultancies, and this is a recurring pattern, and I think this is where we need to draw the distinction between actually capability of utilizing a technology in terms of the practical skills that we need to embrace it, deploy it, adopt it, make the most of it, and the psychological readiness.
Mm.
Are we ready to embrace it? Because this is where we've really got to think about fear generally. What is it that we actually fear? Is it, we fear not being able to do it? Do we fear losing our identity? What kind of value is it going to bring? Where do I fit in with this? And obviously, whole issues around, is it going to replace me? So I think it's a bit of a minefield that organizations and, employees are trying to navigate. So I think
Yeah.
where I'd start to encourage people to reflect on is that we need to really draw a distinction between capability and psychological readiness. And how do we actually make that visible? How do we, as leaders, as managers, as organizations, what do we do with that? How do we
Mm.
measure it?
Mm.
How do we kind of utilize that? Um, so that we can support people differently. Some people are going to embrace new technology quite quickly. Others are genuinely gonna, they're in that workshop, they're there, they're present, they're nodding, they're saying yeah, and then they go back and they're very slow to adopt and to
Yeah.
embrace.
And that's really interesting because again, being involved in the delivery of training and developmental sort of processes in organizations over the last sort of 20, 25 years, you get those people that just nod and agree. They wouldn't disagree with anything you say in a session based, educating people to try different things. But the difference between those people that agree and do nothing versus agree and do something is immense. And I guess that's the bit that we're talking about. That's the bit that Engage gets into. It's into those reads where you're really trying to analyze and identify what is the bit up here in someone's head that actually determines whether when they hear something that could be useful, they do something with it, or they hear something which is useful but that fear overrides the usefulness and somehow paralyzes them from trying to embrace that change and become a stick in the mud or put their head in the sand, whatever metaphor you want to use.
Yeah, and I think this is where kind of really getting our head around this concept of mindset. We've talked about this, haven't we? This,
Mm,
whether we think of that as being our psychological readiness, these are the things that are going on inside our mind, limiting beliefs. Do I feel confident to embrace something that feels like it might replace me, or that I really, it's too technical for me? So,
yeah.
so confidence beliefs will really impact our decision making. Are we going to embrace it? Are we not? It'll really influence whether we're willing to take some control and ownership. Are we going to be bold in that space? And again, it's really important not to judge whether people are embracing or not. But as a manager, as a leader, I really want to understand who in my team need extra support. What kind of
Mm.
support? How do we start to help people feel more confident so they're more likely to embrace? And that's where openness to trying something different, openness and being willing to actually adapt and do something different becomes really relevant. So we know that the more that we're facing resistance within our teams, that it's about that's a signal. That's a great thing when
Mm.
we see resistance. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing in many respects because it tells us as leaders, as managers for the organization, that this is a signal that we need to pay attention to. What is that about? Uh,
So I think that's really interesting, Jodie, because it's patently obvious when you see it, but really hard to get under the skin of it. Because people just don't embrace it. If they don't embrace it, there'll always be an excuse as well. These people that are reticent to embrace change can always trot out reasons why they're not embracing it, and it's nearly always based on historic situations rather than looking to the future and opportunity. So I wondered, what is it you think, or if you could explain it, you'll know, what is it that Engage does and identifies that specifically then provides the framework for developing them to have or to encourage them to develop the mindset required to change and adopt change?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's first and foremost, it's about trying to make these unknown, these hidden variables around psychological readiness. It's making them visible. So
Hmm.
it's, if we're using Engage to support us with that, we're doing a short survey, like a 10-minute assessment that will give you a profile. It will bring some awareness and say, look, for example, here you go, Simon, this is where your mindset is at the moment. Or it might be the collective mindset of a team or across the
Mm.
whole organization. Where are the areas that are going to support you to drive change, to overcome fear, and where are the areas around your mindset that are going to trip you up, that are going to interfere with that? So it starts with that initial 10-minute assessment. You then get a profile at the individual level, team level, organizational level. It gives you data. But importantly, you know, that's just part of the journey. It'll bring the awareness around where your mindset is at the moment. But then
Mm.
importantly, it takes you on a journey. It says, right, here are some practical things that are going to help you to kind of overcome that fear, build some resilience, remove some of that resistance, support you to feel more motivated and empowered when you're facing uh, situations that fear, that bring some fear or anxiety.
Hmm.
So it takes you on a journey. And if we're using accelerator program, that's a really practical way of not just kind of saying, look, here are some priorities, here are your actions, but here's a 12-step program that will really, on a week by week basis, give you a little nudge. Here's something to try. Here's something to do
Yeah.
differently. And of course, all of that is based on your mindset. So it's not just kind of identifying and making visible our mindset, that readiness, but it's really supporting us to do something practical with that.
And I guess though it's great that the system, the accelerator element of Engage that you talk about takes you step by step, either weekly, every monthly, whatever the scale, the time scale is for you. It takes you through a 12 step or 12 touch point process. But I suppose the other great thing about that is it gives the manager something to come in and start talking about that is relevant for you and your mindset Whereas often a management coaching intervention will be about the things you need to do to make the change happen, which often relate to the thing you're trying to drive, but not the mindset towards the thing you're trying to drive. So you can talk to me, for instance, about what food I need to eat to go on a diet, what exercise I, but if you don't actually help me go and do the exercise or adhere to the diet, just talking about it is why so many people go around in circles and start processes and don't see it through. And I guess this is the same thing. There's knowing what to do, but there's doing it, and they're not the same thing by any stretch of the
Yeah.
imagination.
And I think that's the key, Simon. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. I think it's, we pay a lot of attention to the external environment that we're operating in. As a manager, we've got a job to do. We need to mobilize our teams, inspire our teams to do the actual job that we're employed to do. But how do we kind of support people around some of that psychological piece that, we can't see it, can we? We can't
Mm.
pick it up, we can't touch it. How do we know to support? And they're going to be team members that need more support or different support to other team members. So, our manager program has been really, we've had amazing feedback around that is because we know managers are the facilitators of change. We know they are the enablers, and
Hmm.
that can be both positive and negative.
Yeah.
So, it's how do we support managers so that they can work with team members in the right way that's going to drive the solutions, the behavior change, which is ultimately what we need. We want performance gains. That's what everybody
Yeah.
typically, if we distill it down, we're all looking to get some kind of performance improvement.
Well, it's funny you say this because this reminds me. I was with a client once, with a colleague. We were sat with a client who was a sales director in a multinational pharmaceutical company, and we'll leave it at that. And they said he sat and said to us, "I can't believe it. Our people just will not do." And there was this big program they were trying to approach things differently with customers. He said, and we keep telling them what to do. They keep agreeing that they know what to do. They can repeat back what we know, and none of them are doing it. It's as if they're deliberately spiting us not to do something. My colleague said, this is the thing that made me laugh. Well, what idiot recruited them then? And it was just completely stone-faced. He said, well, it was me. And I think it wasn't the fact that he was an idiot to have recruited those people, but I think it illustrates you can have people, you can explain to them what to do, they can understand what to do, but if you don't have the parallel of helping them psychologically to embrace what to do, which is what we're talking about, then they'll conjure up all sorts of barriers and fears and self-sabotage in their head and just not do it. And so knowing what to do and even knowing why you should do it is simply not enough if you don't work on the right establishing the right mindsets that will drive a desire to want to do it. And I think that's the thing. We're fools to think that people are just going to embrace things because they're sensible, they make sense, and that we're going to benefit from it because we just don't. We have to have more than that. I
Yeah.
know eating well, sleeping well, and exercising are good for me. It's blooming hard to do it though, and that's a constant mindset piece. It's not knowing what to do. It's being able to make yourself do it when you don't necessarily feel the urge to do it. And I think that's where the engage, from my perspective at least, is it's holding your hand, it's taking you through, it's supporting you, not in that thing, but in your attitude and mindset towards that thing. I think that's the really quite unique piece about it, in my mind at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's that old adage, isn't it, Simon? You can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. We're quite complex things, humans, aren't we?
Mm, mm.
It's and we're talking about things that are, for the most part, invisible. We can't see the mindset. How do we do something practical with something that we can't see? We
Yeah.
talked about that last time, didn't we? How do we make that kind of iceberg model, the bit that we can't see below
Hmm.
the water level? How do we expose it? How do we get sight of that complexity that's going in our head that trips us up?
Yeah, and I guess the thing that we started talking about AI because it's the big new buzzword. Certainly in the last year and a half, it's taken over. It's got a momentum all of its own. But of course, AI is just one example, which is easy to fix on because it's happening. You can see people who are, you can clearly see they're worried about it. They don't understand it. So their likelihood of embracing it is significantly lower. But this is true of anything we're trying to get our people to do. Any initiative in any organization, our mindset towards that is the thing we're really talking about. And it's so easy to think there's nothing we can do about that, or I'll just do it when I'll just coach people when I'm with them. But typically, like I said, when I see people coaching around what they need to do, not necessarily how they feel and what they think in their mindset towards what they're being asked to do. And that's a completely different conversation.
Yeah.
Hence, you need both. You need to be coached on one thing, but you need to be supported and coached on the other too. Both the tasks, the actions, the process, but the mindset, the attitudes, and the beliefs. And those two things need to be done together if you're going to really succeed. And I think that's what our most successful people do. They both of those things are working for them.
Yeah, and I think increasingly I am having these conversations where we're investing in the programs, in the leadership, in the technologies. We're making lots of investment, but if we want to embed, empower, have some
Mm,
longevity, some sustainability, then the mindset piece is the bit that's going to take us there.
mm,
If we don't have an attitude, a set of beliefs that's going to support us to really embrace and drive outcomes, then that's going to be much slower, much harder to embed.
mm.
It's gonna take a lot longer if we even get there.
Well, I was going to say it's in a sense, without being flippant, it's easy perhaps for you being a psychologist and understanding the sorts of conversations you've got to have with people to help them in that field. But if you're a manager in most businesses, you've got no psychological training, no real in-depth coaching experience other than in the role that you've got, within the corporate world. It doesn't make you necessarily a hugely experienced coach, certainly not on the psychological components. And the minute you start speaking to most managers about, well, you just need to coach people around their mindset and their attitudes. It's like this with the best will in the world. People, those managers will nod at you and say, "Yeah, yeah, I do." And then you're going to walk out the door and they're going to think, "What the hell was that conversation about?" And it always reminds me, very, very early on in my career. Um, I remember a story, and someone said to me, you can sit in front of a group or stand in front of a group and say, look, here's a bit of knowledge that will help you do your job better. And people say, oh, thanks. And they're quite happy to take that on. If you say, look, here's a skill. If you get better at this, it will make you better at your job. Most people say, well, that's fine. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. So I've got a bit of knowledge and I've got a skill. If you ever say to people, now I want to talk to you about your attitude, most people, the minute you even start, they fold out arms and fall back here, very defensive. There's nothing wrong with my attitude, mate. You want to check your own out. And you can see the barriers. You can see the barriers go. So no manager really in their right mind is going to go down that avenue if they're not really comfortable in what should I be talking about? What should I be challenging, supporting, helping people with? The beauty of the Engage program, and particularly Accelerator, is that the system is feeding that in. And as a manager, I've only got to do pretty rudimentary coaching around that to stimulate the sort of conversations where people can start to really work on themselves from a mindset perspective without feeling threatened. And I suppose that's the bottom line. It's helping people have those sorts of discussions, which typically get pushed to the back because no one dares get into that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just managers, Simon. I hear and see this even with coaches, you know,
Yeah,
and actually even with psychologists. I think this is a very specific area when we're looking at mindset and
yeah,
psychological readiness.
yeah.
You know, and I think it's really we want to get on with our day job as a manager, and we don't want to become a professional coach, or we don't need to be. I think Engage is great in that sense. It
Mm.
provides a really robust framework that is repeatable, consistent, reliable. We've got language that we can relate to. We're not judging people. We're not saying, look, you can do it or you can't do it. Mindset is something that you own. It's your mindset.
Well, that's
And
right.
and
Yeah.
and the great thing about mindset, which I really love the developmental nature of this, it's something we can change. It's
Mm.
not fixed. It's not who you are. this is something that we can, with the right tools, with the right framework, with the right support, this is where we can start to challenge our own thinking and drive different outcomes by shaping a different mindset and approach and attitude and outlook.
Yeah.
But we can't do that if we don't measure it and we don't know what we're doing in that
And
space.
I guess that's it, isn't it? Because no one's born with beliefs. No one's born with either empowering or limiting beliefs or self-doubt. That's all learned. And learned in exactly the same way that we learn skill and knowledge, but
Yeah,
we don't tend to think of it in that way. Most people tend to hang on to, well, my mindset's me, it's who I am. But of course,
yeah.
you're absolutely right. It's a learnt element of you. And
And that's a great thing.
if you
Yeah,
want to do something different, you've got to do something different.
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
the old adage, isn't it? Keep doing what you've always done, you keep getting what you've always got. And
yeah,
that's the beauty of being able to challenge robustly but fairly on around the mindset concepts. So yeah, really great.
yeah.
Look, I think that's brought us pretty much to the end of today's sort of chat. I find it fascinating. I've got to admit, because there's so few options out there to help just normal people have the sorts of conversations and challenges and developmental conversations around their mindset. And for me, that's why I think there's something a bit special with Engage. But thanks ever so much
Great,
for your input again today.
great.
Anything you want to just finish?
Oh, I do. I think, I've also enjoyed that. I think that you made a point that is probably good for us all to reflect on. It's not just AI. I know we've kind of majored on AI in this conversation, but I think, whenever we're faced with any kind of change, because that's the constant thing, that's the irony, isn't it?
Hmm.
Change is now constant
Yeah.
and fairly rapid. But how do we support people in that space? So I think there's loads of other topics that we can start to tap into with this idea and concept of change mindset being
Yeah.
the constants in that.
Well, it's funny. Maybe that's a great topic for our next chat because I always remember one of my first sales jobs I ever had at Xerox, and there was a great banner over the sales area, and it just said the only constant is change. And I
Yeah,
think there's lots of people experience sort of change burnout because they're constantly being asked for the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. So maybe we can have a conversation around that, how fatigue about change affects us and what we might be able to do about that.
brilliant. Great. Lovely.
Super.
See you
Lovely
next
to
time.
see you again. Speak
See you.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.